Hey everyone, it's Alexander Robinson. Welcome to the channel, and welcome back to Patriotic Comedy Month. Last week I reviewed Team America World Police, which is still a really funny movie, even if there's a lot in it that really doesn't hold up. And now this week I'm going to be reviewing a movie where you could use the word comedy in the loosest terms. This is my review for 1941, which came out in 1979 and is Spielberg's fourth theatrically released film. This movie takes place soon after the attack on Pearl Harbor, where the Imperial Japanese Navy basically forced America into World War II. So now the Japanese are planning their next attack on America, and they figured, hey, the best way to lower American morality and enthusiasm for the war is to attack Hollywood. So that's their aim, and along with a Nazi commander, they try to figure out how to get to Hollywood. Whenever I hear this movie being brought up in conversation, it's usually in a very negative light. People talk about how this was Spielberg's first major flop, how it's his worst movie, and it's just a terrible film all around. But usually with some of these movies, you have to wait decades to see if that still rings true, or if it's just people like being stuck in that mindset, and newer generations can look at this movie and go, yeah, this is actually better than people make it out to be. So that's what I was kind of hoping to experience with 1941, because I'd always heard about this movie and how infamous it was, but I never actually got around to watching it. And now that I've actually watched 1941, I gotta say, I side with the people that think this movie is hot garbage. Like, this is awful. There are so many things that are wrong with this movie. The biggest one, in my opinion, is that it's a comedy that is not funny in the slightest. I understand what Spielberg was trying to do with this movie. He was trying to make a screwball comedy, kind of in the vein of Abbott and Costello's Buck Privates, which I actually did a review for 10 years ago, so you can go check out that video right here. And he is trying to make a comedy that feels like something that came out of the 1940s. Hell, you even have Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, who later on would go on to star in Blues Brothers together, and they worked perfectly together on SNL. But the execution just so doesn't work. I gave you a plot description at the beginning of this video, and the reason I stuck to that one specifically is because the rest of the movie is utter chaos. There is hardly a thread attaching everything that's going on in this movie together. Way too many characters to follow or care about or even remember their names and personalities. Because this movie has so many different characters, the cast in this film is insane. Like, there are just way too many people to count. I already mentioned Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi, but you also have Ned Beatty, Lorraine Gary, Murray Hamilton, Christopher Lee, Toshirō Mifune, Slim Pickens, Robert Stack, John Candy has a small role in this movie. Like, the list is endless, and some of them are very much wasted. Not to mention that the tone of the movie is just all over the place. While the bulk of it is supposed to be a 1940s style screwball comedy, the scenes involving the Imperial Navy and the Nazi commander who accompanies them is mostly played straight. And it's really surprising. Like, I'm still baffled that this movie managed to bring in both Christopher Lee and Toshirō Mifune, and the latter is playing this role as seriously as possible, to the point where he actually asked Spielberg if he could direct the Japanese extras because he found them to be very undisciplined. And by the end of the shoot, all the extras came to really appreciate Mifune. So I really admire that. But it's just so bizarre that this straight-faced performance is in a movie this chaotic and ridiculous. And Christopher Lee, as the Nazi commander, doesn't really have anything to do. I will admit that it's impressive he's speaking German throughout his entire performance, and when he's interacting with Toshirō Mifune, he's still speaking German while Mifune is speaking Japanese, and they both understand each other. That's some Star Wars nonsense right there. What I'm trying to say is that those scenes are played seriously, except for Slim Pickens, but everything else is just a complete farce. Like, everything else in the movie is played for laughs, and it just gets to a point where it's not funny. There's no punchline to any of these jokes. It's just pure, utter chaos. And when I'm sitting down to watch a movie for 2 hours, a comedy no less, and it's never funny from beginning to end, that's a major, major problem. Another thing that bothered me about this movie was how sexist I found it to be. I mean, it's not overblown sexist to where I'm offended, but it is very noteworthy. Lorraine Gary plays Ned Beatty's wife, and throughout the entire movie, she's just in a panic, she's in a worry state, she's just there to be the panicked housewife. Nancy Allen, who is introduced in this movie as a hard-nosed secretary for the general, has a major problem in this movie where she's fluttered whenever somebody mentions airplanes, and one of the soldiers takes advantage of this, and she pretty much is horny for him despite him just being a kind of scumbag. There's another plot line involving two women who basically go out dancing. One of them is pretty much there just to be olive oil, where she's being taken away by one man and the other man who she actually loves is trying to save her. And then her best friend, who would end up playing Marty McFly's sister in Back to the Future, is there to just be horny all the time and try to go after the man who's going after her best friend. It's totally scatterbrained, and the way this movie portrays women is just a bit uncomfortable. Is there anything good about this movie? Well, I can actually name two things that I liked. The first is the model work. There are a lot of action scenes in this movie. Some of them take place in downtown Los Angeles. There's the infamous sequence with the Ferris wheel that Murray Hamilton and the actor who would voice Mandark in Dexter's Laboratory are on. All the model work in this movie is impressive. Those moments are well shot, they're inventive, especially with the Ferris wheel, and it's just cool to see miniatures get blown up and destroyed. It would have been cool if there was a giant monster in the middle of it all, but that's beside the point. The other thing that's good about the movie is the score. John Williams rarely misses, and even though overall this score is one of his weaker ones, the 1941 march is a march that has kind of taken a life of its own. Back when I was in college, I attended 2 college football games, and both times the marching band would play the march from 1941. And it turns out that that's actually a really popular march to play at college football games, which I find really fascinating that Spielberg's, in my opinion, worst movie has a theme that has kind of lived on beyond that. However, all of that can't save this movie from what is essentially the most scatterbrained comedy I have ever seen. Like, it's one thing to be a bad comedy. If it was just that, I would let it go and say, well, it was bad, but whatever. But this movie is made even worse just because of the level of talent, not just in front of the camera, but behind it. I mentioned John Williams, I already mentioned Steven Spielberg, but the writers of this movie are Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, who would go on to write my favorite movie of all time, Back to the Future, and both of them shared story credit with John Milius, who this very year wrote Apocalypse Now. So it's insane the amount of people who worked on this movie. And again, in regards to the cast, I just have to wonder, how did they get all these people to sign on into this movie? And I think the reason is as simple as it can be. It's a Steven Spielberg movie. This was still very early in his career. He had just come off of Jaws. He had just come off of Close Encounters. So naturally, if you're an actor, you're thinking, oh, a movie from the director of both Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind? This is obviously going to be a hit, right? Well, contrary to popular belief, this movie wasn't actually a box office bomb. It made money and was able to make a profit somewhat, but when you compare it to how much money Jaws and Close Encounters made, and how this movie, like those two, shared a similar production history where it went over budget and over schedule, then yeah, I can see why this movie has garnered the reputation of being a flop. And that's something that I myself even got wrong when I reviewed Dial of Destiny last year, because Spielberg's very next movie was Raiders of the Lost Ark, and the caveat for Spielberg to direct that movie was that Lucas had to ensure that the movie wouldn't go over budget and over schedule, like what happened with Jaws, Close Encounters, and 1941. For a comedy that runs this long and really does fail so hard to make me laugh, this is one of those situations where I would tell it to burn in hell. But because of the history of this movie and the legacy it kind of left behind, I'm gonna be nice and say don't waste your money on it. There's only one reason to watch this movie. Not because it's entertaining, not because it's funny. I mean, if you see it and you find it to be funny, then more power to you. But the only good argument that I can make for watching 1941 is just to get an idea of where Spielberg's career was back in the day. Because, again, after Jaws and Close Encounters, he was like the director at the time, him and George Lucas. So for him to come out with 1941 kind of showed, oh, Spielberg can't produce hit after hit. So, okay, but again, thankfully he bounced back with Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., and then the rest is history. For historical purposes, that's why I would recommend you see 1941 for yourself, but as a movie on its own, I just don't recommend it whatsoever. And there you go, that's my review for 1941. I hope you enjoyed it, and with that, we have come to the end of Patriotic Comedy Month. Now, next month, for August, I'm going to be doing what I'm calling Outlaw Couples Month. This probably would have been more appropriate for February because of Valentine's Day, but I wanted to do Best Picture Month instead, so I could finally have a reason to review West Side Story. But anyway, you guys have been asking me to review more classic films, so we're going to do that with this month. The first movie in this lineup is probably the most iconic outlaw couple movie you could possibly imagine, Bonnie and Clyde. This movie landed in my top 100 favorite movies list. I did a review for it on my very first YouTube channel when I saw it for the first time. So now I'm finally excited to talk about this movie in further detail. And then the next movie I'm going to be talking about is Steven Spielberg's first theatrical release, The Sugarland Express. I guess in hindsight, I should have just devoted a whole retro review series to the movies of Steven Spielberg, but maybe some point I can do that for the movies of his that I have not seen or reviewed. So yeah, August is Outlaw Couples Month. Hope you guys tune in. And before I go, I'm going to give a special thank you to all of my YouTube members right here. If you want to help support the channel even more, you can do so via YouTube memberships. You can sign up for as little as $1.99 a month. That's what the starter pack costs. And I want to thank you all who support the channel, whether you're subscribed or a member. Thank you all so much. And until next time, I want to know what you guys think about 1941. Whatever your opinions are, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell button to get notifications. If you want to find me elsewhere on the internet, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd, Threads, and my theme park and travel channel right here on YouTube. I'll see you guys in the next video, but until then, have a good day and take care of yourselves.